Welcome back to our new series that looks at all things digital platform for leakage analytics, or DPLA, where we explore how data, analytics and technologies are shaping the future of the Cadent gas distribution network. In our first episode, we introduced the DPLA and talked about how modelling for gas leakage detection is transforming the gas sector. If you missed it, go back and give it a listen. Today, in our second episode, we are diving deeper. We're exploring the in-field detection technologies that DPLA is trialling, how they've been selected, and why a multi-technology approach is key. You'll hear from 3 experts who are on the vanguard of our SIF innovation project, and trust me, there's a lot more going on than just gadgets and gas. I'm Kieran McDade, Innovation Specialist at Cadent. I lead some of the work packages within the DPLA project, and I'll be hosting today's discussion. Those that follow our Tech Talk webinar series, hosted by Katie Green and myself, who incidentally hosted the first podcast, will know my familiarity with the content. Go and give those Tech Talks a watch and listen if you haven't to learn more. Today I'm looking to share fresh perspective from our key team members, and so joining me are Curtis Hayes and Thomas Osborne from Cadent, who will talk about the business and operational impacts and the benefits that these technologies bring, and from our delivery partner Guidehouse, Savva Storozhenko, who will bring us up to speed on how these technologies were selected. So let's dive in. Firstly, we'll turn the heat up on Curtis. Like all good stories, let's start at the beginning. So can you tell us what in-field detection technologies are and why is Cadent trialling them?
Okay, so I'll start with the why.
Yeah.
So as we've spoken about on episode 1, we've moved from a deterministic model to a probabilistic model. This means that we need more data from in-field technology to fill these gaps, because the only parts that we're currently modelling are high pressure and potentially intermediate pressure pipes. So everything below that, which is the majority of our network, we need to be able to physically monitor the leaks. So we're looking at handheld devices for last mile on our AGIs. We've got fixed sensors on our AGIs as well, on the fence line. And then we've got vehicle-based, which are driving around the streets. And we've also tested out satellite.
So one thing that naturally stands out is that Cadent isn't just trialling one solution. We're testing multiple technologies. You mentioned a whole different host. Can you shine some light on why we've taken that approach, why it's important?
We've got different use cases for it, different technologies. So we've got, on an AGI, we might have fixed sensors. So they'll be continuously monitoring methane emissions and semi-localizing. We're going to then have handheld devices that can pinpoint these locations right down to the fitting of a joint. We're going to have vehicle-based, it'll be in the streets, and they'll be picking up leaks in your areas. And then we're also trialing satellites, so a large area captured all in one go that you can take a look at.
So it's important to have that spread to encapsulate all of our asset profile. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we need to build the bigger picture, and you can't do that with one device.
Okay, so to be effective, you're tailoring the tech to the situation.
Exactly. So we've got a huge network, over 131,000 kilometers of pipe. So we can't go around with a handheld, for example. You have to have a good mix.
No, I can't really imagine Tom here walking around the entire network with a handheld. I can't see that happening.
Unless there's a lot of handhelds.
Curtis, thanks for setting the scene. So let's bring Savva into the conversation. Savva, how exactly did Cadent decide which technologies to trial for DPLA? To my memory, it was a selective process. Can you elaborate for the listeners?
Yes, of course. As many, I don't know how many here know that DPLA actually started a while back, right? The trials didn't start in discovery and alpha phase of the project. And in the previous phases of the project, there's a big mix of technologies that was analyzed, looking at things like helicopters, drones, and other devices. When the beta phase came, we had to reevaluate everything that has been done before. Now we actually need to perform the trials, and we want to be robust in making sure that, okay, we do consider all possible tech, right? So we had to increase the scope of what we looked at. And then obviously the technology evolves quite rapidly nowadays, and it's been 2 years before between DPLA starting actually, like the first phase and then the beta phase. So yeah, had to look at what is most appropriate today. And with that in mind, I believe the team has looked at over 40 technologies or so initially, like just considering everything possible, handhelds, which have been mentioned earlier, sensors, helicopter, drones, satellite. That scope was then narrowed to 20 providers that, after first look, we thought will be the most applicable ones for at least for initial interviewing and assessment within the DPLA.
You're right, Savva. A lot has happened in that time. I think when the project started, I had hair, so there's considerable amount of time passed. Can you elaborate on some of the attributes you looked at when interviewing the providers? What was important for us to make sure we had the right provider for the right job?
Yes, of course. So once we have created our initial list of like 40 or so providers, we then created a detailed and relatively, I would say, robust framework, which looked at things like obviously cost, right? Is the technology affordable, right? If we were to use it large scale, can the technology effectively quantify small leaks? Can it detect effectively small leaks? Can technology be working in any condition, essentially, right? Like if it's raining, if it's sunny, if it's suddenly snowing, minus 200 degrees, or whatever it is. And then, last but not least, we also wanted to make sure that the technology integrates well, obviously, right, with a DPLA platform, obviously, first, but also within the kind of wider Cadent network. And that, like, and when I say integrates, it's not just a technical integration, it's also like, is it relatively user-friendly, right? Will the technology be received well by the energy ops, for instance, who are going to be using it? So yeah, those are the key, I would say, things that we looked at when creating this framework. And when then we use this framework to select, first of all, the 20 providers, right, which we then wanted to interview in order to understand, okay, yes, first look in the framework, you guys do pass this criteria, but like every provider will say only the best things initially, right? And in their selling brochures, right? So we actually wanted to dive into a bit more detail, ask them some difficult questions, and understand, is it actually all true? And yeah, and then once we have interviewed the 20 providers, we then started to narrow the scope down to 5 providers that we wanted to take to trials. Why 5? It could have been 4 initially, like we never had a number 5, but that 5 kind of came out very naturally out of that selection process of those 20 providers. It's just like those 5 that we selected, we thought that, okay, they do answer all of our most important questions, right, that we want to be answered by technology. And we believe that a mix of those 5 will be able to cover all of Cadent's network and provide, useful insights for the DPLA project.
So we're looking at it in hindsight and obviously talking about how we first introduced the projects. Now we're looking back holistically over that long period you mentioned and touching on a point. I'm sure you guys don't work if it's raining, do you? You get to
Unfortunately,
stay inside.
we do. Yeah, unfortunately.
So it's the technology has to reflect your robustness as well. So Savva, it wasn't just about the technology specifics; it has to work in field as well.
100%, yeah. Literally work in field, be received well, as I mentioned, within the energy ops teams. I think throughout the trials, we noticed that technologies that have been received well by energy ops actually did very well when we actually did the final scoring for them. That's a bit of an insight, I guess. Because in reality, right, in the BAU phase, when we roll out the technologies, who will be using them if not energy ops, right? It's not going to be the salesman of the provider going around and pinpointing.
Well, we'd hope not, at least.
Well, we hope not, at least, yeah. So yeah, that's one thing. And again, obviously, the integration aspect is super critical. It is used in field, but then it needs to be integrated to all the platform. Throughout the trials, we looked a lot at the API integration, right, to make sure that whatever is captured in the field can, in about 15 minutes time, already be within the DPLA cloud, so to say,
Yeah.
and then almost instantaneously used for further analysis.
No, that's fantastic, and I'm sure that point will be further explored in one of our future podcasts as well. And you've explained a lot there. You've kind of gone fairly whirlwind sort of approach of everything we've done, and I'm sure our listeners will appreciate that. So good insight on the whole selection process. So now we've touched on the shortlisting. Could you share the details about the technologies selected and what makes each of them unique?
Of course. So when selecting the providers, we kind of try to group them in, I would say, three main areas, right? And that being, first of all, sensor technologies, right? That would be able to continuously monitor the emissions on any AGI site. Then we wanted kind of sets of universal technologies, really, right? That can really, when being used, target multiple assets, right? Either it's pipelines along, right? It can be AGI sites at the same time. It's just very universal, right? Like it can almost cover big amount of network when just driven for a small amount of time. And last but not least, we needed some sort of technology that can validate, right, the leaks that we pick up when using this either vehicle-driven or satellite or any other technology. So yeah, so we needed definitely a last mile technology to be present in our mix. So one first technology that we actually became very sure about to be used in the trials was the vehicle-based technology. Reason for that being a relatively easy choice for us is because previously Cadent has been already using a vehicle-based technology to detect the emissions along the network, and that has been received well. So we thought that this would be a pretty robust choice. And as you can see here in front of me right now, I'm not sure where the camera is, probably there. But this is a TDLS sensor that is being mounted to the vehicle technology that we are using. How it works is the sensor is mounted to the front of the car, and then the car essentially drives across normal roads, nothing special. And while it drives across the roads, it basically picks up anything that's being emitted along its route, and then the results are analyzed post. The second technology that we wanted to look at was, as I mentioned, the sensors. Sensors, there's a lot of providers that we went through that offered fixed sensor emission detection. And as it's a very popular technology, we couldn't say, okay, we're only picking one provider, right? And we're going to go with them. We had to pick at least two because there's such a broad range of sensors. Like we wanted to pick two at least to understand, okay, like, will they be somewhat similar at least, right? Because if we only picked one, it could give us maybe a false indication in a way that sensors are actually accurate, but like in reality they're not. So we want actually to pick two to see what discrepancy between them will be, and then to understand, okay, which one of the sensors actually would be more accurate. So sensor technology was important for us to include because we wanted to have some continuous emission monitoring at the AGI size, and there's a lot of them within Cadent's network. So obviously we can't always have a vehicle-mounted technology being driven around the AGI sites on a daily basis to pick those up. So hence, yes. Another technology that we looked at, as I mentioned, we needed a last-mile technology. As you can see in front of me also, right here, this is a handheld ultrasonic camera. Maybe right now through the camera you can see Kieran right now if you look, but there's no leaks on him, I think. But
I'd hope not.
Yeah, those are good news.
Robin saw it.
But yeah, this is an example of the handheld that we selected for our trials. We didn't have many handhelds really. I think it was only we were choosing between 3 providers or so maximum when we were doing the shortlisting of a handheld. So why this specific camera was very interesting for us is because, well, obviously, as we said, the cost aspect is important, but also the pinpointing accuracy. So before actually having a final say, okay, we're going to pick this provider or this provider, we actually did demos at the AGI sites
Yeah.
at Cadent. where we brought different providers with their handheld devices, and we literally like do the pinpointing there, and then compare the results post that. And this lovely camera right here proved to be the most accurate one, at least at that point of time, and hence why we selected it. So last but not least, now if we want to kind of zoom out a bit, quite literally in this case, yes, we already had a vehicle technology, right? We had fixed sensors at the AGI sites. We had the technology that confirms and pinpoints the emissions. How about those types of assets that these technologies cannot get to, right? Like, and Cadent has quite a bit of those, right? Where there's no road to be, how to get to the specific, I don't know, a site or a pipe or whatever.
Fields.
Yeah, exactly those. You would know best. So we thought that, okay, we need a technology that can capture it, right? And hence why we thought, okay, satellite could be a good option then, right? Obviously, at that point in time, we don't know if it's accurate or not accurate, but at least theoretically, a satellite is able to pick up any major emitters, right? Some leak that is literally in the middle of nowhere, right? And then can trigger us to go and see using, like, for example, the bore vehicle if possible, or a pedestrian device at least, you know. Is it actually the case?
Yeah.
So, so those are the 5 technologies that we have selected.
So it's a quite a diverse selection, and sort of bringing on what both you and Curtis have said. Obviously, we've got some of the providers here. We've mentioned kind of vehicle, we've mentioned fix, we've mentioned last mile, which I appreciate. Last mile, depending on who you speak to in our world, has a very different meaning. So conscious that we mean it in a space of literally the last step of our confirmation journey in regards. And as Savva mentioned, that broad profile kind of allowed us to kind of give a good asset interpretation, considering it's a consortium project. There's lots of vested interest, and it's not just different types of technology. There's different types of identification or methodology within that. You know, we've touched on TDLAS, which is tunable diode laser absorption spectroscopy, for those that really want to know acronyms, which we're quite fond of. You've got LiDAR, which is 2D, 3D mapping with a laser. We've touched on ultrasound. You've also got thermal imaging, you know, use cooled, uncooled cameras. So there's lots and lots of different options we looked at. We looked at different mobilization options for those, you know, whether it's thermal on a drone. So we do really have a very diverse selection. So within that selection, when we started looking at the scenarios that we'd like them to apply to, what kind of those asset scenarios, where would we potentially use maybe 1, 2 or 3 as kind of a standard approach? Maybe, for instance, one I can think of is maybe fixed sensors and the handheld. Can you put a bit more light on that, Savva?
Yeah, of course. Throughout the trials, we did have quite a lot of instances where we had an overlap, right, in using a specific tech, and that overlap happened on purpose in order to kind of, you know, benchmark one tech against each other. Really. So, for instance, as you mentioned, sensors and the handheld, right? That makes usually happen at the AGI sites, right, where we obviously had sensors giving us readings on daily basis. These are the emissions, and then on specific days, the energy ops could come to the site and using this handheld camera, validate the specific assets that are apparently leaking, and then we could get an indication. Okay, obviously we do anticipate that the ultrasonic camera is more accurate, right? But then how far off would the sensor reading be? So that's just some examples.
So yeah, different scenarios, how we apply the technologies, and we made sure each of the technologies you mentioned before, a really good word of that was overlap. So how the technologies can potentially be used with one another, and what that kind of future state looks like when we start considering sort of long-term options. So we have the technologies, we know where we'd like to use them and how we use them at trial, and where we'd like to potentially have them overlap. So Curtis shared with us the why. Can you speak on the how? How did we go about doing those trials, so to speak, with the technologies?
Yeah, of course. So initially we mapped out the trials to last for around 6 months, and that covering all the 5 providers that we spoke about earlier. Across the trials, we rolled out each of the providers one by one, right? We didn't want to kind of go and dump all of them at the same time. We wanted to roll one out to see, okay, is the technology working? Has everything been installed correctly? And so forth. So first, actually, we started the trials with rolling out the vehicle technology. We first wanted the technology to be rolling in North London area. And then over the second half of the trials, which is the second 3 months, we wanted the technology to be rolling in East Anglia. And maybe I didn't give a bit of background, but essentially when we mapped out the trials, we didn't want the trials to be happening in the entire Cadent network, right? It's a huge network. We needed to narrow down the scope, so we picked North London and East Anglia to be the two kind of regions where we wanted the trials to happen. And the reason for that being, why these two specific regions, is because this density of assets, right? Within the North London, you can obviously expect a very dense amount of high pressure network, and in East Anglia, it's the opposite, really, right? So hence why it was interesting to see, okay, if we put these technologies in the two regions which are quite opposite of each other, are we going to get somewhat the same level of detection and quantification and etc., right?
Yeah.
Essentially, will the performance change? So with that in mind, yeah, as I mentioned, first we actually rolled out the vehicle-based technology, which we first rolled out in North London and subsequently rolled out in East Anglia over the last 3 months. Really, the driving route of our vehicle-based technology has been closely matched to one of the technologies that Cadent already using. And the reason for that being is we wanted to validate. We want to do some cross-comparison work between the two to give Cadent as much insight as possible also into like what they're already using.
Yeah.
And then we also made sure every time that once we rolled out Satellytics, right, which was the second provider that we rolled out, we wanted to make sure that the vehicle-based technology is always present within the area where Satellytics takes its capture to make sure that we're instantly able to then go and validate it and react on it. So yeah, really the vehicle has been relatively flexible, but first North London, then East Anglia.
Yeah.
Then once Satellytics has been rolled out, we then looked into deploying the Distran device because it was a relatively easy deployment. We had to purchase two devices, made sure that there was at least one device in each of the depots, one in North London, one in East Anglia. Made sure that all of the relative training has been conducted with the energy ops beforehand. Energy ops knew, okay, that this device will be sitting in their local depot. They will have to be using it over the next 6 months, essentially, almost on a daily basis. So you better know how to use it, essentially. After a series of trainings, we have already noticed that the device has been constantly used by energy ops, meaning that the training has been effective and that the device is actually quite well received and popular. And last but not least, the fixed sensors. This has been for us obviously the most challenging, the challenging ones to roll out, because it's a lot of sensors, right, to arrive first of all. So there's sort of logistical aspects with them to make sure that sensors are delivered, distributed along the local depots, but also we had to select AGI sites where we would need the fixed sensors to be. And selection of AGI sites was a separate activity we can talk about. But across our trials, we have selected roughly 4 AGIs in North London area, 4 AGIs in East Anglia area. So then those sensors, essentially, which we got, had to be distributed across all those 8 AGIs. And then we had to make sure that they're installed, right? So we had to carry out a lot of training with someone coming from the sensor team to make sure energy ops are familiar with how to install the specific sensors. Wasn't the easiest exercise, honestly, but we got through it. The sensors have been deployed, and then
I think that was your first real taste of Cadent, Savva, from an external provider.
Yeah, exactly. exactly. And then, yeah, over the 6 month period, we received a continuous emission monitoring from those two providers. We also, I mean, it kind of brings the previous point where we mentioned the overlap. As I mentioned, the sensors have been installed at 8 different AGI sites. Across some of the AGI sites, I think it's only 2 AGI sites, we decided to install both sensor technologies, and that's specifically for this overlapping piece where we actually wanted to test the discrepancy between two providers and to see which one is actually accurate. So that's actually one more comparison piece that we didn't mention earlier. But yeah, and across the trials, then we have driven with a vehicle-mounted technology over 1,000 kilometers, I believe, which is a huge number. We have taken roughly 6 captures using satellite technology. So 3 in North London, 3 in East Anglia.
Yeah.
Roughly. And we have terabytes and terabytes of data from the fixed sensors
Yeah.
and the handheld.
It's important to note as well. I think we've focused on it as a trial. As Savva mentioned, sort of geographical topography, asset topography. A lot of these technologies were new. We didn't have something similar in our wheelhouse. It's all very, very shiny, all very new. So it was important that we took sort of baby steps, so to speak, to make sure we were getting it right. Obviously, the various elements of overlap too. But yeah, really, really interesting on that front to how we brought that together. And we drew a line in the sand, didn't we, sort of 18 months ago, and these are the technologies we've chosen, with the idea that we'd always retain agnosticism looking forward to bring new technologies in. But going back to your sort of last point around the 1,000 kilometers, what we've actually ended up doing is probably a considerable independent study on this technology as part of the project, that I think as we're sort of now organizing our outputs and going through all those pieces of data, is how best to interpret that. And I think that's kind of our next natural handover stage. So that's been really interesting. And I think sitting on that data piece, Curtis, I'll jump back to you. So you sit within the work package structure, and I won't bore everyone with project management, but you sit with the tech delivery and the data delivery work packages. So what does that mean long term for the adoption of DPLA by others and their potential technology choices?
Yeah, so I think as you just mentioned, keeping it agnostic to whatever technology you're going to use is the main key. Like we see time and time again, our business and every other business, you get locked into a provider,
Yeah.
you're stuck with it.
Yeah.
So for us to keep it agnostic and allow new emerging tech to come in, then things are going to evolve.
Yes.
And we're going to be ready for it.
Yeah, and we kind of see some of that filter through, don't we? And then we in innovation, we're quite fortunate that we deliver things in kind of an innovation bubble, right? And we kind of have a little bit more leeway with certain elements and a little bit more, oh look, there's a shiny thing. And then we kind of come back to the sort of brass tacks where we try and integrate and we kind of incorporate into the business, and dependent on the size of the technology, if there's an obligation at the time to adopt it, if there's any kind of regulatory parameter to drive that adoption, tends to be sometimes where we kind of get a bit stuck. The project this size, with the regulatory wins we've had, it's keeping things moving. But like you said, really important not to just say, right, we draw a line in these 18 months ago, we said, right, these are the technology providers that go in with some of the shortlist criteria Savva touched on earlier. It was very detailed. It involved sort of all aspects of the business to deliver. It's important now, though, that if something else comes along, that we kind of we relook at that. We don't just say, oh, we've already got one. We can't at the time. So the solution will need to reflect that new technology coming in. Correct? Yeah. So if we take preference out of the equation just for a moment, so we've obviously got our preference for 18 months. It's fair to say technology is also rapidly developing in this space. So Savva mentioned we've spoke close to 40 providers, and I think in our initial shortlisting, we had lots of conversations, almost 30. And I think since the project's been going on, I've probably spoke to at least another 10 in detail. I don't know about you, but it feels like it's getting faster. Like there are more and more technologies coming out all the time in this space. Like, but what's been experienced just recently?
Yeah, well, as you said, like the technology just keeps improving.
Yeah.
Like, every time you, like, even the companies we're using are developing a new version of what they've already got.
Yeah.
So things are just getting better and better. So you've just got to be ready for that and be open to changing things up.
Yeah. And I suppose sometimes as well, like, and probably more of a question to you as well, Tom, to bring you back in. Obviously, we could develop something for 18 months at trial, and by the time we've got to the necessary approvals to, say, distribute that product, it's already moved on, and we then have the job of handing that over to you, and then you kind of use that product for so long, and then we're looking at the next thing.
Yeah, within operations, we build trust in equipment that we're using.
Yeah.
And the worry is that if we roll something out and then we're constantly changing, there's the risk there that training is not going to be up to scratch and things like that. So we have to have a good strategy behind everything we're rolling out.
Very, very thorough. And you've got deep roots in operations.
Yeah.
Long time. Obviously been a fantastic help to us office pods in the duration of this trial, like, massively, and we've been out and seen a lot of stuff. So how might those day-to-day activities you mentioned, how might they shift if this technology becomes sort of business as usual, or what we refer to as our acronym friendly places?
Yeah, so within customer operations, obviously we react to customers' reports a lot of the time. We're very, although we're managing assets, we're looking at assets all the time, and we're always trying to create a picture of risk. There comes we sort of got to change our mindset a little bit.
Yeah.
That actually, if we can be proactive in finding locations of escapes and emissions, ultimately we're ahead of the customer.
Yeah.
We're going to straight away be on the front foot with the customer. We've got that element of trust.
Yeah.
And I just think it's going to be a big change in mindset.
Yeah. And as a gas distribution, we're, very risk averse, and rightly so. It's very important stuff, from a safety perspective, that we need to be, on the ball with all the time. It's totally appreciated. I mean, you mentioned having, we have a very reactive methodology to support that. And obviously we're now seeing steps towards what we kind of classify as proactive, where we're physically going looking for it, and we've seen regulatory change to that effect. How much of sort of a culture shock do you think that's going to be as we go forward?
Yeah, so it will be a culture shock, and there's definitely going to need some discussions about strategy. Even when we were doing the trial, we had to sort of know the pace of what we were doing at, so that we weren't taking all of our resource and manpower away from critical operations that were ongoing. So when we obviously found stuff, we were having to deal with that as business as usual. So we have to think about what the equipment was finding, and the locations, but in that sense, I've been on many gas in premises at 2 a.m. when we didn't want it.
Yeah.
So this is the period where proactive looking for gas escapes in proactively will help us in the long run, and hopefully drive down them public reports.
Yeah,
which would be great.
It's really interesting you say that, because one of the objectives we had, and sort of our main driver from our sort of consortium, and kind of the objectives that were set for us by the mandated project, is, these technologies, they need to be able to detect and quantify, and a lot of our kind of testing and reporting and ultimately sort of decisions are made around that. But we're quite keen to start building the additional benefits use cases that we see from that, and it kind of touches on that point of your strategy. And we look at some of the technologies, and guys like yourself are identifying to us where else this technology could be used.
Yeah.
And we're on a very, I wouldn't say a limited timeline, but things are moving. So how do you think, sort of moving on, how do these technologies, how would they enhance our current approach, and what do we need to do to kind of get that where it needs to be?
I think it enhances our at-risk assets. I mean, if we have a picture of every asset that we feel is a risk, we can almost, we can tailor works around it. We can proactively plan, engage with customers more in regards to, we've got more time to prepare, and ultimately give off that good customer service.
Yeah.
And also, when we're talking about, it's that surprise element of not knowing what's coming in. When we know we've got something there, we can tailor that. It may mean road closures, things like that. We've got good engagement before works prior to.
So in summary, then, proactively go and look at any one of our assets.
Yeah.
Get a full kind of bill of health for it, in as kind of a sort of a
like an assessment
terms, and then factor ahead maybe into budget or discretionary amounts. How are you going to then approach that and get it up to standard?
Yeah, I think there needs to be a broad and open thinking about how, time. We're talking about timelines from the time of finding that to repairing it, resource, materials, and again we talk about local engagement.
Yeah,
and we don't want to ruin relationships that are already there.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that side of it, and strategy is a massive piece.
Yeah, and I think it's another huge aspect of the project that we've not touched on yet, but that handover element of making sure that these changes we bring in are brought in the right way and they're picked up in the right manners. So finally then, as kind of coming into this project as, I wouldn't say an outsider, but definitely kind of having that edge to you of I've seen a lot of this before. This is all, you guys have got excited again. What would be your advice to others who are presented the opportunity to get involved with this technology?
Look, it's very exciting stuff. I think in regards to being on the front foot, I would say just keep an open mind. I think with any new technology, we have to have an open mind. We have to think of different ways of working, and we have to step away from the ways we already know. And I think long term, the benefits will be massive. And I think that's what we need to keep a focus on, that we're not always in the now. We're thinking about the future, and in regards to operations, we need to start thinking and tailoring our work to that.
Fab. It's good to hear. Good to see forward thinking. So, thanks to Curtis, Tom, and Savva for sharing your insights today. That brings us to the end of today's episode. We've explored the origins of the technology, the selection process, the different types involved, and the trials it's undergone. Which it's gone by very quick. We also looked at how it fits into the broader project landscape and the potential operational benefits if fully adopted, which there's a lot of work yet today. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll be diving into how in-field detection technologies that we've talked about today and the modelling from the previous podcast are integrated into the platform. Until then, keep following the journey of the DPLA project as we continue to explore new ways to make gas distribution smarter, safer and more efficient. Thanks for listening.